Hi, Merry Christmas. Welcome along to Tweet Street Scotland, occupied home of the satirical saltire. We've got a Christmas special coming up. Hope you all enjoy it. Hope you had a nice Christmas. I certainly a wee boost when I received the phone call for the guest that we've coming on now. So I hope you enjoy it.
At first it was the Tories, now it's the SNP, struggling and fighting, no to set my Scotland free, so I say fuck it. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, everybody. Welcome along to Tweet Street Scotland Occupied Christmas Panto Special. With me this evening, as usual, my co-host is JB Whitesnake. Merry Christmas, JB. How you doing, mate?
Not bad, Peter. Good to see you. Hope you had a nice time, sir.
I have. What about yourself, mate? It was all nice and
yeah, it went
relaxing.
fine. Super. Yeah.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Right now, I just want to take you back a wee bit first, JB. Can you remember about April time this year? We had a wee private conversation, and he says, "Where are we going with this? What we want to be doing?" And I says, "Right, well, okay. For the Christmas special, we want to be having Alex Salmond on, right?" And you laughed and went, "Hi, right, very good. We're not getting there, right?" So, Merry Christmas, mate. Our Christmas special guest is playing the party Widow Twanky. So no, the former First Minister of Scotland. It's none other than Mr. Alex Salmond. Hi, Alex. Thanks very much for joining us. I hope you've had a nice Christmas. Thanks very much for agreeing to do this.
Great Christmas. I'd just like to make it clear to everybody, I'm just doing this for the money.
and on that note, we'll have people checking bank accounts everywhere, right? But we're completely grassroots. So it's an honour for us to have this man here. And JB, it's over to you for the first question, mate.
Certainly, Alex, great to speak to you. I've been a long time admirer. I've watched you in the House of Commons for years and years, and honestly, it's a great privilege to speak to you, mate. I really do appreciate you taking the time to speak to a couple of 5'8", just getting interested in independence like you. First question I would like to ask you, and there's no particular rhyme or reason to all these questions, but I'll just put them together. I want to ask your thoughts on the restrictions being put on protests by Westminster and that going through the Houses of Parliament about protests and such like. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, not just restrictions by Westminster, of course, the whole of Parliament's are doing approximately the same thing. I mean, it's all stuff and nonsense, of course. The last government to try this was Tony Blair's, when he had a one-person objector to the Iraq war, used to bell at him through a microphone in Parliament Square. Brian, I'm trying to remember Brian's second name, he's dead now, unfortunately, but Brian was... I used to take him out sandwiches, sneak them out from the canteen because he was there all the time. And he just constantly harangued Tony Blair from a megaphone in the middle of Parliament Square with his tent. And he became quite a rallying figure. And so they actually tried legislation to ban protests in Parliament Square. But it was actually an anti-Brian piece of legislation. And I remember it well because I obviously spoke against it and I delayed it and did this, that and the next thing. Eventually the English High Court knocked it down, which was one up to the English High Courts. And this is in the same mode. I mean, a parliament which tries to ban protest. Now, of course, we're talking here about, civil, democratic, peaceful protest. There's plenty of remedies under the law to stop people being disrupted or violent or even offensive, but we're talking here about people's right to protest. It's one of the essential rights that people have or are meant to have, and the fact that it's trying to be restricted in Westminster and in the Scottish Parliament speaks a great deal about the nature of our current political representatives who believe if you can, it's out of sight, out of mind. If you can stop protests from being seen by them, they don't believe they're happening. Actually, protest is something that proper democratic politicians should welcome, and government should welcome, incidentally, because it provides a good barometer of popular feeling, and they would do wise to pay attention to them as opposed to trying to ban them.
That sounds it's very strange how this protest situation is developing. It leaves us less room to manoeuvre, so to speak. But I was want to take you back, Alec, to sorry to have to do this, to just after the 19th of September 2014. Now, I stayed up through the night like a lot of people did, and hoped and hoped and hoped that what I was seeing, I wasn't seeing. And then you come out and you made your speech, and it was like a death straight away. But shortly after that, it was just, I started to find my feet again. But I just wanted to see, what was your drive? What got you back on your feet after such a disappointment? Because for me, you've always been somebody that I've kind of looked to as a proud Scotsman. What was your initial driver, your first fighting thought afterwards that got you back on track, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I've had better days than the 19th of September 2014.
Haven't we all?
So it was, especially because, most elections in my life, and I've fought lots and lots of them, I've kind of known what the result was going to be. And I thought we had a pretty fair chance of winning in 2014. And I felt that through the last month of the campaign. So it was a disappointment, and all the more so because it was something I thought we could have won. And I mean, okay, we came pretty close, and we put on whatever it was, 15% in the campaign and all the rest of it. But the chance of securing independence had been a long time in coming. It's not something that happens every day.
No.
And therefore I knew the significance of not taking it, and indeed the penalties that Scotland would suffer as a result of not taking it. The decision to resign was, well, it was, if you like, a tactical decision. I thought that was the right way to move the national movement on. You basically, somebody takes responsibility, and then you go on with it basically, and that's what, in terms of tactics, it was absolutely the right thing to do, because it took all the emphasis off the Yes being beaten. I mean, within a couple of weeks of the result, it was the Yes campaign who were behaving like winners, and the No campaign who were behaving like losers, and of course that was vindicated in the 2015 general election. Mm-hmm. So tactically, it was a really great idea. I'm sorry if I upset you, incidentally, but I think you were more upset by the result than upset by my resignation. But strategically, looking back, obviously, I think things could and should and would have been done differently over the last few years. But in life and politics, you take your pick and you live with it. In terms of how recovering from it, I mean, I was quickly impressed by the mood among the Yes supporters, and I knew that none of them believed that was the end of the matter. I've been in politics a long time, so I'm old enough to remember the 1979 referendum. And the mood after the 1979 referendum, because it was regarded as something which was effectively in the bag, that's the devolution. And although the vote was won, it wasn't regarded as being won. And the mood among the supporters of the Parliament was disconsolate, and politics, and obviously accentuated by Margaret Thatcher's election as Prime Minister. And that put Scottish politics into deep freeze for years. But the mood after the 18th September 2014 was quite different. And therefore, my mood picked up with the national mood. I thought there was opportunities to come. And if the cards had fallen slightly differently, not in terms of what happened in Scotland, because obviously the SNP won 56 out of 59 seats. You couldn't have expected to win more than that. But in terms of what happened in the UK, where a hung parliament had been widely expected, and if Ed Miliband had been a better leader, there would have been a hung parliament, and then there would have been obvious opportunities to progress Scotland's case. But as I said in the book I wrote, The Dream Shall Never Die, that I was convinced that we'd gone so far towards independence, and we set the precedents about how to get independence, And obviously, the most important thing that the people in Scotland, or a lot of them, had changed their attitude. You know, the Scotland that went into the referendum campaign was quite different from the Scotland that emerged from it. And the Scotland that emerged from it struck me as the sort of Scotland which would get to independence. So, you know, obviously it was a big disappointment, but there was reasons to be hopeful for the future. Let's put it that way.
Aye. John?
Yeah, just following on to the last question, Alec, I think I'm sure you're aware of the Human Resources Intelligence Bill and the Policing Bill went through Parliament recently, and it gives the British state sweeping powers to do things that would have been considered abhorrent if they feel they want to do it. It's things that we would have condemned in other countries, and it's been suggested that the powers that be could have draconian powers to persecute people who they think are a threat to them. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, not just in these powers, but if we take cases in the English courts and the Scottish courts in recent times, the cases of Julian Assange in the English courts and the case of Craig Murray in the Scots courts, nobody looking at these cases would have any confidence in the judicial system's willingness or wish to uphold the rights of free speech or protest or dissidence or anything else. I mean, both of these things, international courts, European conventions would look askance at in terms of how the legal system has effectively been used to bear down on individuals who are inconvenient from the establishment's point of view. And I think we've got great reason to be worried about civil liberties. I mean, I'm not saying that you know, we've been living in a perfect society, far from it. You know, there have been many judicial injustices, but you know, things aren't improving at all. And I suppose what would worry me more than anything else is certainly in parliamentary terms. You know, if let's say the Julian Assange case had taken place 25 years ago, then you would have found voices across the political spectrum who would be vocal as parliamentarians and say, wait a minute, you know, this ain't right, basically. You know, let's have a thought about protections of individuals and human rights and free speech, even when we don't like what the person's saying or doing. With very few honourable exceptions, Jeremy Corbyn, David Davis from the Tories, there's been little or nothing in terms of parliamentary examination. Just a handful of MPs who've raised their voice on the Assange case, saying, "Look, you know, is it really appropriate that you know, we have a legal system which cows to America, particularly in a situation where America disregards every other legal system in the world? And can we be responsibly secure on persons' rights if they go into American jurisdiction? And thirdly, of course, why have we got this person locked up for these endless months when clearly he's not in a good medical condition?" You would have had lots and lots of voices across the political spectrum, you know, genuine liberal in the true sense of the political meaning of the word, saying, "Wait a minute, this isn't right." Virtually nothing now. Virtually nothing. Virtually not even a whimper, with these few honourable exceptions. So, you know, I think we've got great reason for worry.
Aye, I have to agree with what you've said there, Alec. I mean, you've experienced far too close a situation of late yourself, with the tainted by apparent bias of the Scottish government, the full treatment that you've gone through, and I have to commend you for how you've held yourself. Now, there is mention of a book coming out. Are we any closer to a date for when that book might be?
I think, well, the Craig Murray case rather indicates why a book wouldn't really, or at least a real book wouldn't be possible, because it'd be hemmed in by legal restrictions, which would make it impossible to tell a story. So let's, you know, we'll see what the future holds. So other means of redress are available, so I'm told.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. John?
Yeah, I'd like to read you a bit, Alec, that I've put on Twitter quite a few times, and you're aware of the chap. It actually says, Lord Hope of Craighead, former deputy head of the UK Supreme Court, says devolved powers are rendered worthless by the new system put in place by UK ministers, given powers to do things which contravene the devolution settlement without consultation or consent. Now, bearing into that, what he has said, do you think there's anybody in Scotland who actually believes that the British government of Westminster aren't going to decimate the Scottish NHS as what they're going to do in England with the NHS? We're going to have massive privatisation and a two-tier system. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, let's disentangle the two things. I mean, Lord Hope, incidentally, when I was First Minister, I was never ended having disagreements with Lord Hope. Over a variety of things. After hearing some of the things he said in the House of Lords on this and other matters, I think I owe the man an apology. I think compared to most retired judicial figures, that he speaks with a clarion call of common sense and willingness to acknowledge real politics, and is very effective indeed. So there you are. You've now got my formal apology to Lord Hope for our fast disagreements. That he is, and this, of course, is right, because the Westminster Parliament is taking upon itself means of undermining and disregarding the devolution settlement. In a way that, I mean, without going into too much detail, I mean, Donald Dewar had a stroke of genius back in 1997 because of his experience in the first devolution bill, which was fraught with difficulties and what should be devolved and what shouldn't be devolved, and endless parliamentary chicanery and arguments. He came to the conclusion the way to do it wasn't to specify what was devolved, but specify what was not to be devolved. And it was only the reserve powers would be specified and everything else would be devolved. It's why, incidentally, the Scottish Parliament ended up in control of climate change. Because back in 1997, climate change wasn't regarded an issue of the consequence, it would have to be reserved. And so it was therefore devolved, and obviously we made the full use of that in the 2007 Parliament by passing the Climate Change Act. But that was a stroke of genius from Donald Dewar, and gave the Scottish Parliament protection, because any change within that, you'd have to add to the reserve powers. Now, what the current government are doing through that Act and a number of other administrative and political moves is cramping in the devolved settlement and using other means of restricting. In other words, if you control competition law, you can control the health service. So even if the Scottish Parliament, the argument would run, resolves that we shall not under any circumstance privatise the health service, then with the use of competition law or other mechanisms, you can make it extremely difficult, liable to be sued for not to go down the road of increased privatisation, and that's basically what's happening across a range of issues. Now, it's not that the Scottish parliamentarians haven't spoken about it. They have. It gets pretty negligible coverage in the mainstream media, most of whom probably quite agree that this is what Westminster exactly should do: put the Scottish Parliament in its box and keep it tight. The real issue is that, as another parliamentarian said back in the 70s, power devolved is power retained. That's precisely what makes it acceptable. That was power, the opponent of devolution of the Scottish Parliament. But in terms of saying power devolved was power retained, of course that's correct. And at the end of the day, a devolved parliament of any kind, a devolved parliament will always be subject to override by Westminster, and even when it's protected by the courts, as it might be under certain cases, even if it won a court judgment, then the next thing that would happen was the law would be changed to make sure the court judgment was changed. So devolution can never be a stable settlement, because you'll always get Westminster governments who are prepared to encroach on the Scots Parliament powers. They'll try to do it by stealth. They'll try to do it by financial pressure. And this one is doing it by both. And they'll try to do it in such a way as nobody really understands what's going on in the general public. And therefore they can get away with it like a thief in the night. Which is why, of course, a devolved Parliament would never be a stable settlement. It's either going to go one way or the other. In my view, it still will go to independence. But if it doesn't go to independence, it will go to a neutered Parliament that won't cause a Westminster Tory government any bother, because it'll, it'll decide what colour you paint the street signs, but it won't decide anything of significance and importance.
Aye, aye. And just talking about a thief in the night, you didn't happen to watch the Queen's speech, did you?
Well, I certainly wouldn't describe Her Majesty as a thief on the night. I did actually watch the Queen's speech, and I didn't watch it live, I'm afraid, but I watched it, and I thought it was very effective. Actually, I thought she did. I think it is difficult when watching the Queen to remember. She is a splendid example of a nonagenarian with her wits fully about her and her abilities virtually unimpaired. So she's if we're all operating at that level in our 90s, then I think we'll be very, very glad indeed.
Oh, she's a very smooth operator for her age. I'll give her that. The thing I was going to touch on, Alex, was the fact that, according to reports in the Queen's speech, there were mentions of, obviously, her husband had passed away. And I was wanting to go on to, over the last few days in Scotland, the number of hospital admissions or infections for coronavirus is steadily on the increase. We've already had a great number of fatalities, a great number of people that have lost their life to coronavirus. Do you think that the government, the Scottish government, are acting in the best interest of the Scottish people, or in the best interest of how the Westminster would allow them to treat the Scottish people?
Well, I don't think the Scottish government would disagree that an independent government would have been able to act differently in a number of key respects. For example, it's very difficult to have, if you want to introduce a lockdown, it's very difficult to do that without proper economic financial compensation for businesses. And if you don't have the levers to financially compensate in an effective way, it's difficult to take that decision. Certainly a broad scale one. On other things, the Scottish government have had freedom and ability, some of which they've exercised. I mean, certainly by general agreement, the explanation of the pandemic has been better in Scotland. But the substance of policy has been very, very similar until perhaps the last few days, when there have been fairly substantial departures north and south of the border. I think, when the story of the pandemic's written, I think governments both in Edinburgh and London will have a great deal of difficulty in answering the initial phases of the pandemic and the decisions that were made about care homes and releasing people from hospital, and the slowness of the initial lockdown as well. I think they're going to have a huge difficulty with that. Apart from that, ironically, I think one of the great weaknesses is actually what most people, public opinion, regard as a great success, which is the vaccination program. I think once the decision was made that we'd rely on vaccination as opposed to social restrictions of any level in the summer and autumn of this year, the year that's passing, the vaccination program in the autumn slowed down to a trickle, and it made us, the society, vulnerable to a variant that inevitably was going to come along. If it hadn't been the one we've got, we'd have another one, which would be more infectious, hopefully less potent, and that's a normal way for viruses to go, but certainly more infectious. And therefore, when that Omicron hit, it hit a population, key parts of which were unvaccinated. Or to be more precise, the decision to not vaccinate children and send them back to school in the autumn was disastrous. Inexplicable, actually, since schools are clearly a vector of infection through the population. even last week's decision to keep people at school was extraordinary, because the children are either unvaccinated or partially vaccinated and not protected. And for themselves, hopefully young people by and large don't become seriously ill with COVID, but some do. And the impact of long COVID is still not clearly understood. But they're certainly a vector for infection of the rest of the community. And the other relatively weakly vaccinated people, of course, are exactly the sort of folk who would be liable to infection in pubs and nightclubs and other close forms of communication. So, I think the message has been better explained in Scotland than it has been in London in terms of the measures that are under Scottish control. Over the balance of the pandemic, the policy has been quite similar, and I think that's to our disregard, because I think things could have been done substantially better. And it ain't wisdom after the event. I've been saying these things throughout. And also there's a real danger that you can lose the room in these matters. Various times during the pandemic, I take a fairly keen interest in these matters, right? And I can promise you, at various times, I've not known what the regulations are. Trying to work out, how many households are now allowed in so many situations. I mean, it really is quite difficult. And I think a lot of the messaging has been, as I say, better explained in Scotland, but overcomplicated. I mean, there are a lot of things that aren't known still about this virus, but basically it's an airborne virus, which if you're in a confined space, poorly ventilated with other people, then you are likely to catch. And that it becomes even more so with variants which are more infectious. But by and large, on the whole, and these things are never absolute, this is not something you're going to catch off packages. It's unlikely you'll catch it in an outdoor environment if you're sensible and properly protected. And somehow the key essential parts of the messaging have been lost, and the wish and willingness to tinker with regulations. Whereas things like keeping, if you can't protect school kids, you've got no right to keep the schools open. And you just don't, and it's wrong. And I know it's everybody's concerned about the kids' education, but as I remember it, they were all meant to have a laptop by now.
Yes.
And so if you're going to keep the schools open, and that's your huge overwhelming priority, then for goodness sake, vaccinate the kids. And that wasn't done. And the reason it wasn't done were obscure, apart from the fact there's something called the GCVI, which couldn't make up its mind. Incidentally, a committee which is singly unfit for the purpose of dealing with emergencies. And any politician in this situation is going to find things extraordinarily difficult and pressurized. But you won't always take the right decisions instead. But one thing would ensure you're liable to make the right decisions is having clear, concise, definite advice from people like your chief medical officer, as opposed to relying on some huge committee. And secondly, having all of the weapons to take the decisions you have to take if you deem them necessary to be taken. And then explaining as best you can to the population why you're doing things, and pray to God for help.
Aye, so don't listen to the BBC. Right, John, over to you, mate.
Couple of quotes here for you, Alex. Chris Patton has said, and it's an older quote, but he did say it, since Brexit, the Conservative Party is now a right-wing English nationalist party, and so has Ken Clarke. Both said the same thing. The Conservatives are now right-wing English nationalists. And Chris Patton further said that Scotland and Wales, since Brexit happened, should now have be given the opportunity to break away from the UK. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think basically that's right. I mean, that's Chris Patton as the ex-governor of Hong Kong.
Oh, that's right.
But then he should know a bit or two about quasi-colonial situations. But I just, it's a question of when the Tory party became an English-orientated right-wing party. I mean, I think that probably predates Brexit, but by some time. But yes, I mean, it's great to have the support of Chris Patten for another Scottish referendum. But the Scottish referendum or another electoral test is something that has to be generated in Scotland. That has to be done by political determination and public determination to make it happen, and the political mobilisation of the people to ensure it comes about. And in general, over the last few years, I've been convinced that the spirit among the people is willing, but the leadership has been weak in terms of its resolve to bring these matters to a head. And the sort of public popular campaign with popular demonstrations, political pressure correctly applied, substantial international initiatives to secure the acceptance of legitimacy, preparations for legal action, the coordinated campaign to make Westminster bow to the wish or the right of the Scottish people to have an exercise of self-determination. That has been very difficult to see in recent years. And so while it's lovely to have Chris Patten, I think it would be a jolly nice idea. I think the essence is going to be whether we make it happen in Scotland or not.
Yeah, sure. Peter?
I just wanted to, you might not have seen it, but we recently had Campbell Martin, author of Was It Something I Said, on our podcast, Alex. And he was saying that back in his day within the SNP, he noticed there was a few devolutionists or gradualists in the party before you took control. And he had said that, well, he hinted towards John Swinney as being one of them. Before you took over back then, was that your impression of some of the members of the SNP, that you had some people not pushing for independence?
No, and in fact, just the opposite. When I was a young upstart, maybe a few years before Campbell was a young upstart in the SNP, and caused no endless amounts of grief. And like Campbell, I mean, I should just say at this point, I didn't expel Campbell. John did, which is probably why he has some difficulty with John. But when I was busy getting expelled from the SNP, as I was, and I had lots of disagreements with the leadership of the SNP at the time. I mean, Gordon Wilson and I, fine person though he undoubtedly was, we didn't agree on virtually anything in terms of political tactics or strategy at all. If I thought the SNP had a weakness, it wasn't that they didn't believe in independence. On the contrary, they all believed in independence. Whatever disagreements I had with Gordon Wilson or Jim Fairley or any of the other great figures in the SNP of the day when I was a young activist, I never for 1 second doubted their commitment to independence. Not for 1 second. What I doubted was they had any strategy to get there. And that's what I and others tried to inject into the SNP, a strategy for actually achieving independence. And in a sense, that was a gradualist strategy, incidentally, because it was a strategy that involved securing a Scottish Parliament, and then from the platform of the Scottish Parliament, becoming the government of that Parliament, organising a referendum and getting to independence. That was the strategy. I mean, there was a few other complexities in the way, incidentally, but in a nutshell, in a phrase or two, that was the strategy. I now would have fairly substantial doubts that not that there's not a clear strategy. I'm certainly we're back to not having a clear strategy, but I don't think. Well, I think there's a lot of people in the SNP, a number anyway, who don't share the enthusiasm of Gordon Wilson or I had for independence. Not because they wouldn't quite like it, it's just not important enough to jeopardise other things. And I suspect what that's about is a kind of blind spot for which I have to accept my share of responsibility. And that's it, because the SNP I grew up in and cut my teeth politically in. I mean, there were no career politicians in the SNP. I mean, you'd have to be insane to be a careerist in the SNP in the 1980s. I mean, how could you be a careerist when there was only 2 MPs? I mean, you would be off your head. So by definition, the number of people who joined the SNP or worked for the SNP looking to establish a paid political career as an MP, and there was no Scottish Parliament then, but or research assistant work was very, very limited, because there were very limited careers within the Scottish National Party. Now, obviously, as the SNP became the dominant force in Scottish politics, into the 2000s, that changed. And the SNP, for a number of people, became a very attractive career opportunity. With a vast number of posts, this, that, and the next thing, available, not just elected ones. And what I've got no doubt whatsoever that many, many people in the SNP, certainly at grassroots level and at parliamentary level, still have their heart and soul committed to Scottish independence. I do think there's a significant number that don't. Not because they wouldn't quite like it, not because they wouldn't say I'll support independence, but because there are other things which to them have a greater priority. Identity politics would be an example at the present moment. Other things as well, maybe just a comfortable life. So that is a situation for which I have to take quite a bit of responsibility, but because I think others didn't see it coming. Maybe Campbell Martin had more foresight than I had, but I didn't see it coming to the extent that it did. I believed and thought that everybody in the SNP, as the SNP I grew up with, had the same or even more enthusiasm for achieving independence that I had. And that was a bit of a blind spot. Maybe it's an inevitable thing that happens with political parties. Maybe the same thing happened with the Labour Party and socialism, for example. But it's something, if we want to get to independence, if we really, really do, we're going to have to sort out.
Learning from our mistakes, I suppose. Right, John, on to you, mate.
Alex, the UK media continues to move towards the right, more and more right wing. For example, GB News. How do you see that figuring into the next referendum, for another referendum, Scottish independence? We're constantly getting battered by more and more right wing views. What's your thought on how that will play into it all?
Well, I mean, I don't think GB News in itself is the main threat, incidentally. I mean, I think it's pretty limited in its impact and effect, but it's a good illustration. I suppose GB News would have been a development which would have been deemed as laughable even a few years ago. Many people laugh at it now, but I mean, it's the very fact it exists is an indication of the trends you're talking about. Far more insidious, of course, is the very tight control of the mainstream media. And the newspapers are no longer particularly significant in terms of their own readership, which is very limited, but in their ability to control an agenda which then is rebroadcast by television, which is still very important. It becomes a currency of the day, and the tightness of control of that is a significant problem for the independence movement. Now, it should be said that. So that's no different from what it was in 2014. And in 2014, I thought the Yes side took the initiative via street campaigning, via social media, via the communication of a positive, invigorating ideas. And I suspect that's still the thing that has to be done. I mean, I welcome the fact that there's the National is a newspaper, but the National circulation and influence is tiny in comparison with the bulk of the Union Press. So it's still a significant problem for Scotland, and something that we have to face down and face up.
Just to add on a wee bit to that, Alex, I don't know if you know, Adam Bolton's retiring or moving on to Sky News. You've obviously spoke to him many times throughout your career, but he done a special, was on for about an hour there, looking back on the media's relation to former British Prime Ministers, and I found it quite interesting for how they were trying to portray the past media's relations with past prime ministers and their cabinets, and looking at how the media in general has viewed Boris Johnson as and what they've let him away with. So I found a great paradox there, and a bit hypocritical, saying that they weren't very critical of the prime ministers then, and looking at it today, they're practically courtiers to the prime minister now. Nobody, he doesn't make himself available to open scrutiny. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Boris's chickens have come home to roost. I mean, he's had a pretty well a charmed existence, but I think, as my granny would say, the gilt's after gingerbread, in a pretty decisive way, you know, and would you know, as to the Johnson phenomena in terms of being able to survive things which would have derailed probably any other politician, you know, many years ago, is I think it's part of the decline of British politics. To be fair, I mean, you know, there was a time where you had to have a personality and ability to be a success in politics. I think it's part of Johnson's success is that you know, in light of the greyness of the men and women around him in terms of the Tory party, that, you know, people were looking for a bit of colour, even if it was off colour, as it were. So I think it's part of quality. But you know, whatever he's got away with media-wise, as I say, the chickens are coming home to roost. I think the media, you know, who you know, if you show the British media a belt, will hit below it if they possibly can. Their claim would be that you know, that he had a Teflon quite quality, that stuff bounced off him. It wasn't a lack of attempting to do it. I don't think that's entirely correct. It's a book by Peter Oborne, which is well worth reading. Peter Oborne, the former, I think he's a journalist with the distinction of having resigned from both the Telegraph and the Mail. And he's you know, Peter's an old style English Tory, you know, very admirable in his views about civil liberties and a range of things. And he regards Johnson as different in degree. You know, it's quite interesting, you know, because he's somebody who was vehemently opposed to Tony Blair in Iraq and you know, the lies and weapons of mass destruction, etc., and the degrading of the political process. But I mean, he thinks Johnson is, you know, the zenith of political dissembling and worse, and so it's quite interesting. You know, that's the judgment he makes. I'm going to say, I made a few tweets last week, which rather discomforted the people in the SNP by saying, look, I mean, I can understand why anybody would like Boris Johnson out of office. Fine, you know, does Boris Johnson deserve to be out of office? Absolutely. Would you know, I lift a finger to save Boris Johnson from being from anything? The answer is no, I wouldn't. You know, so but the idea that Boris Johnson's fall will bring about an improvement either in the condition of the people, the condition of Scotland, or the progress of Scottish independence strikes me as rather far-fetched. You know, Boris Johnson would be replaced by right now Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who is not just a more competent figure, but he's also a much more right-wing figure. You know, it's a right-wing ideologue in comparison with Johnson. You know, if you're looking for somebody to save the poor, then the Chancellor of the Exchequer is no a good bet. So replacing him by a more competent, more right-wing Tory, inevitably, incidentally, delaying the next election, because the last thing any incoming Tory Prime Minister will do is call an election with a majority of 80. You know, so you can guarantee that an incoming Prime Minister will be A, more competent, B, probably more right-wing, given the nature of the Tory party, and 3, will delay an election for 3 years. So, you know, I'm not, so basically what I'm saying to the people in the parliamentary group of the SNP who think their mission in life is to bring about the removal of Boris Johnson, that is going to result, attractive thing though it may be, that's going to result in a more right-wing, more stable English Conservative Prime Minister, who almost certainly will pursue an even more idealistic, ideologue type agenda in terms of persecuting the poor, making them pay for recovery, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer has already shown his inclinations in that matter, and grabbing back the temporary benefit payments and so on and so forth, who will delay an election for 3 years. The great mistake and vanity that politicians of all colours have made from Scotland over many generations is believing that they could change the course of English political history. Generations of talented Scottish Labour leaders believed if only they explained left of centre politics in a nice way to the English, that they would all see the error of their ways. Robin Cook, the late Robin Cook, once actually advocated in the middle of an election campaign, I think 1983 it was, that the people in Scotland should phone their English relatives and ask them not to vote Tory. For Scotland, he actually advocated, and Robin Cook was as bright and brilliant a man as you'd possibly get. He actually advocated that in the middle of the election. You phone up your English relatives and tell them, for goodness sake, don't vote Tory. More recently,
like stopping Brexit.
Well, exactly. You took the words right out of my mouth. More recently, the fantasy, the great vanity was the idea that Scotland could stop England Brexiting, the English people having voted for Brexit. I mean, and so this kind of, or for that matter, more recently, pushing for a general election in December 2019, the only result of which could be to bring in Boris Johnson. I mean, the very same people who are calling for the fall of Boris Johnson are the same ones that voted for an early election to bring about the rise of Boris Johnson. I mean, so all I'm saying is this, that the job of an SNP or ALPA or any parliamentarian or any Scottish politician worth their salt who believes in Scottish independence is to use whatever platform or means or tactics or devices or strategies you've got to achieve Scottish independence, not to attempt to govern the English political system, because that vanity has been pursued for generations, and every person who's pursued it, some of whom were far more talented than the current crop of Scottish parliamentarians, has failed. And failed because of the essential nature of what you're trying to do. You cannot save the people of England from their own political choices. I mean, you might argue, is it right to do so? But I mean, even if it were right to do so, you can't do it.
This
doesn't work.
This is it's been proven time and time asunder. So Tweet Street are like launching a Scottish Thinkers Independent Folks Forum. I noticed that the deputy leader of the Alba Party is mentioning, Kenny McCaskill was mentioning the Sovereign Scottish People Convention or something similar. Obviously, I take it that you're of the same approach.
I agree with Kenny.
Why?
Well, I think what's interesting is Alba putting it into our local election campaign. And what we're saying is that, look, as soon as the local elections are over, that every elected politician in Scotland who believes in independence should get together back an independence convention to mobilise the campaign for the immediate pursuit of Scottish independence. And I mean, obviously, a local election campaign, I mean, all Alba candidates for local issues in their ward, and that's predominates. They're also standing on a anti-poverty, family poverty, child poverty 5-point plan, which is really important, and for women's rights and protected spaces for women, which is a big issue in Scotland at the present moment. All these things are valid, but the fact that we have in our 3-point plan an independence convention with all elected politicians, including local councillors, who believe in independence, getting together and saying, look, it's time to get things done, to marshal this campaign, to mobilise the people, to get Civic Scotland on the march, get the people of Scotland on the march as soon as it's safe to do so, and prepare the legal instruments, the diplomatic pressure, every other aspect of the campaign that's necessary to secure the opportunity for Scots to vote for self-determination, to exercise their right of self-determination, and the better. So yeah, I think the Independence Convention is called for now, and we should get cracking, and it'll be a way of bringing together the various elements. It's not an Alapa convention, obviously. It's not a Green Party convention. It's not any party. It's not the SNP's convention. Independence convention, open to all elected people who believe in Scottish independence and who believe that it's something for the here and now, not for the hereafter.
Here. I just wanted to take you back onto this. You'd mentioned there about women's rights and kids' rights, Alec. Another thing that Tweet Street, we launched it last month, but we're doing another episode of our parents forum, Not With My Child, in January. We've got parents across Scotland and further afield coming. We have the likes of Eva Comrie coming to speak. We have the likes of Michelle Ferns, Denise Finlay, Kerry Black from Northern Ireland, Fem Loveshares on Twitter. So we've got these kind of ideas coming about. But I know that, as you said there, you touched on Alaba's women's. I can't even remember equalities. That is
Policy, which was
yes,
written by Eva, of course.
It was Eva that was written it. There is a real danger that women and kids safeguarding might get blown out of the water, as far as I can see, with the introduction of GRA and other hate crime bill exclusions. It's something that I'm concerned about. Is it something that obviously, as the leader of the Alba Party, you can give further reassurances to people of some of the things that you are trying to push?
Well, I think, the way that this issue is being put forward at the present moment is deeply divisive and deeply worrying. I mean, something like GRA should be, if ever there was an issue which should be sent to a citizens' assembly, a device which has been devised by the Scottish Parliament to talk through controversial, sensitive issues in such a way to allow a debate to be channeled in an acceptable and proper fashion, then this is it. It's not something you charge ahead with and hope that the population don't catch up until after you've passed it. All you do is encourage suspicion, rancour, bitterness, the sort of thing that's going on at the present moment. I mean, most people in Scotland, the vast majority of people in Scotland, want to respect everybody's equal rights. Of course they do. And a long time ago when I introduced equal marriage, I was told what a disaster it was going to be. And I said, of course it's not a disaster, because nobody's rights are being infringed in any way by the introduction of equal marriage. Mm-hmm. The act of introducing equal marriage did not diminish the rights of anyone else. The trouble with GRA and the way that things are being looked at the present moment, then many women are right that their hard-won protected rights and spaces are under threat. And you don't pursue equality, a desirable objective, of course, by diminishing the rights of other people. And if you're going to do that, then you don't do it in a politicized, cack-handed way. You talk your way through it over a period of time and come to a consensus position with mutual respect. The way this debate gets conducted at the present moment is outrageous. It's disgraceful, horrible. It's toxic. Now it's up to Alapa to make sure we don't conduct the debate from the other standpoint in that way, but to put things forward in a reasoned, effective way. And our key proposal to move it to a citizens' assembly seems to me the absolute right one. And putting at some boundary line saying, look, hard-won rights of women should not be sacrificed and jeopardized in pursuit of legislation. That seems a perfectly reasonable point of view as well. So it's going to become, it's an issue already. It's going to be an issue already. It's going to become a bigger issue. And I just wish that people would approach it in a different fashion to what the Scottish Government is doing at the present moment. Now, guys, that was a warning sign. My battery's a bit running.
Well played, Alex. I like it.
unless I can wind up the clockwork, we better maybe a couple more questions. I've got 10% left. It says.
Right, John, on to you then.
Yeah, quick one for you. I'll make it as quick as possible, Alex. In a few short days, we've got another massive benefit from Brexit coming our way. Just as we hit January, we've got another whole load of EU legislation that Boris and the Brexiteers signed up to and agreed to. It's going to mean log jams at ports again. Imports and exports are going to be clogged up. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, obviously Brexit's been a disaster. I mean, you would expect anything that's carried forward by Boris Johnson to be a disaster. And the fact his supreme negotiator resigned, of course, not about Brexit, is you know, that the sinking ship is being deserted by Boris's close colleagues. Now, Brexit isn't going to be undone anytime soon. It would be sensible to move to a more sensible basis as far as the UK is concerned. But the most sensible thing to do is for Scotland to work out how we get ourselves out from under this mess. And Alec has spent a lot of time developing our EFTA policy. Why EFTA? Because that's something you can secure in months. EU membership, desirable though it may be, is something you can secure in years, and you would have to negotiate, and the negotiations would not do well if you were negotiating from a vacuum or from a limbo, which is exactly why we should move to EFTA, and we'd have the willing cooperation of the EFTA countries in doing it, and then into the single marketplace, European Economic Area, and then make a decision as Scotland on where our future lies over the medium term. But secure the economics. Stop the disasters that you've just mentioned happening. Secure the economics, and then the politics takes care of itself. But it's one of the areas the independence platform has to be refurbished at the present moment. That's what Alec is doing. Others should be doing it, bringing the policy to terms of reality as opposed to trying to pretend reality will come to terms of the policy, which is exactly why we're investing that amount of effort in articulating the EFTA position and why. But as for Brexit being a disaster, well, no news there. Just the best line politics is to pay close attention to whatever Boris Johnson says and do exactly the opposite, and then you'll be all right.
The general rule of thumb. Right, Alex. So the question, it's a kind of a two-part question. It was to ask what your highlight of the year is.
The highlight of the year to come, or the highlight of the year that's been?
No, the highlight of this year just been, because I know it's been a tough year for a lot of people.
Well, it's been a tough year for everyone, and I've, by the grace of God, I've got through without any immediate family tragedies, and all of us will know people who've not been in that position, so it's very difficult to see a year of a pandemic as anything other than a comprehensive disaster for all concerned. I suppose if I would look for anything, it would be the resolve of the people in the social and emergency services and health service in terms of how they have stood up to the most incredible, extraordinary pressure. I mean, it is in great calamities and great disasters and great tragedies, you always take consolation of what emerges from the human spirit. And we've had plenty of examples of the human spirit. So I suppose I would look to that and say that's been my highlight of 2021. In terms of 2022, then of course, my hearts are still in the Scottish Cup, as you would imagine, at this stage of the season, and hopefully European football will be back to. If we can't get Brexit reversed this year, then at least we can have European football at Tynecastle, which would be really inspiring to the rest of the population.
Well, that is right. So, final question. I wanted to.
I don't want to be in a situation where Hearts are overtaken by Kelty Hearts.
That's a possibility. Then the way Kelty Hearts are going to need the first defeat of the first defeat of the season today. Actually, just interested if you know your sports results.
That's what's known as a coupon buster.
Aye.
You do realise that there were folk across Scotland who were beating the bookies who hadn't caught up with the sort of the English bookmakers hadn't caught up with the Kelty Hearts' run, and up until quite recently, you were getting really good odds.
Aye.
Well, unfortunately, this week all the wheels came off. However, I'm quite sure Kelty Hearts will be back to form in the new year.
Aye, well, hopefully. Right, final question, Alex. It's one of our subscriber questions for the final question. Their question is, who should you have championed for successor of the SNP, given where we're at the moment for independence?
The great thing about politics in life is you live and learn, don't you? So it would have been hopefully Scotland can live and learn from our opportunities to get to independence and how we can secure them in the future. So, and my greatest belief. You asked the question about after the referendum. My greatest succor and belief in these matters is that I believe that Scotland has changed in its attitude to independence and itself. The attitude to itself by the people's acceptance of the capability of Scotland being independent. The gain that we made in 2014 about the practicality in terms of how to get there was also, and that's the thing that's been jeopardised, in particular over the last few years. But what hasn't been affected is people's inner belief in Scotland's capability and that transformation that's taken place. So that is the bedrock of the future independence success, and that transformation is intact. Rough hew it how political figures do, and on that basis, on that rock, I think the independence case will advance.
Aye, so right enough. The dream shall never die. Right, I just wanted to.
That's very good. Somebody should write a book about it.
Aye, I think somebody really clever has actually done that. So you should check that one out actually if you haven't already. So on that note, Alex, I just wanted to say thank you, especially at this time of year, taking the time out to speak with us. For me, you never left the Yes movement. You never will. There are people that, in my opinion, have never joined. It's up to you, Scotland. It's up to you. You make your own decisions. In the new year, we will have Alba Youth on, just telling us what to expect from them in the short, mid, and long term. We will also have, that'll be myself and John that's doing that.
I thought I was the Alba Youth.
You're looking well. I must admit, you are looking well, but passing for youth.
When I was told by Alba Youth that I had to go on JB and Peter, now I know. I thought it was a couple of drams I was being offered, but it turned out to be a very informative podcast.
Well, I'm glad that you think so, and hopefully in the future in an independent Scotland, we might be able to share a wee dram together at some point. Thanks very much, Alex, for coming on. I'm beaming. I'm absolutely beaming. It's made my Christmas. I'm going to be honest here, I was at my wee down point because I didn't think this was happening. And then just like, I don't know, it was like a Christmas miracle. I got a call on Christmas Eve about 1:45. And then from that point on, I've been bouncing about this house for then, waiting for this. I can't wait to get it edited out so that people can get to view it. Thanks very much for joining us.
Well, it was either that or getting stuck in your chimney. So I thought, all things.
Well, this is better socially distanced, especially with the Omicron variant being so infectious and that. This man is an absolute genius. He thinks about Scotland all the time and he wants to keep us all safe. Thank you very much, Alex Salmond from Scotland, for Cinnamon Bridges, for JB Whitestake. Good night.
Have a good New Year.
Happy New Year.
JB and Peter.
And the rest of Scotland as well. Well, that was a Tweet Street Christmas special. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed it. I hope you had a lovely Christmas and we hope you've had an absolutely magical New Year on independent Scotland.
And the dream shall never die.